Hi, and welcome to the Child Care Aware of Minnesota Legislative Update for Tuesday, March 18th. This is for activity through Friday, March 14th. The biggest news to come out of the House and Senate last week was the election in House District 40B. This was the open seat since the beginning of session, if you recall, and that took place on March 11th. And the DFL representative, or the DFL candidate, now Representative David Gottfried, won that race. So we are back to operating in the Minnesota House under a power sharing agreement. We now have 67 Republicans and 67 Democrats. So there'll be co-chairs of both committees. And of course, understandably, there'll have to be a lot of bipartisan agreement and support in order for bills to move forward, either in committee or on the House floor. Speaking of committees, there were three bills that were heard and moved along last week in committee. First, in the House Children and Families Committee, House File 1916 from Representative West. And this is a program that, or a bill that proposes two pieces. First of all, in an effort to address some of the concerns about fraud in the Child Care Assistance Program, it puts in place a requirement for electronic monitoring, as in cameras, in any CCAP a program that is accepting over $1 million in child care assistance. And it would require cameras monitoring exits and entrances and any place a parent signs in. It also creates a new electronic registration system. So basically having electronic records of children who are attending the programs if the program accepts child care assistance. So that bill was approved and passed on to the House Judiciary and Civil Law Committee. And we will see where it goes from there. Also, in the Children and Families Committee last week, House File 2078, Representative West again. This was originally a much larger bill, but the chair offered an amendment to remove most of the language and really substitute a couple of key pieces. These are pieces that have come out of the most recent draft of the modernization work, the regulation modernization work, and seem to be pieces that are well taken. And two of those, as I said, one is looking at the question of parent access. So it would require centers to allow access to parents to come to the program to see their child during the day. And it adds some language about unless a court order or other legal documentation restricts that access. So I believe this is practice right now in rule, but this would move it into statute and make that extra sentence in there part of the legislation. The other element that it adds is language that, again, is in the proposed draft of the regulation modernization work. And this is around the broad categories: furnishings, equipment, and materials. But it speaks to an issue that a lot of, particularly child care center staff, have talked about, which is the difficulty of maintaining access at all times to things like art materials and some of the other play materials. So this would remove that requirement to have it available at all times. When the language comes out from the amendment, you may all want to take a look at that. I'm broadly summarizing the language, but that's the concept. So those two elements did move forward in the form of House File 2078, and that bill will move to the General Register, which means it's poised for a full vote on the House floor. The final bill that was heard in committee last week was House File 805 from Representative Joachim, and that was heard in the House Tax Committee. And this is a property tax refund that would be established for nonprofit child care centers who rent their facility. So right now, if you are a nonprofit center that owns a facility, you can apply for a tax break. But this is not something that is afforded, a property tax refund, I should say, that is not afforded to our nonprofit centers that rent. So that bill was heard, passed, and laid over for possible inclusion in the House tax bill. So those were the three bills heard in committee. The first bill that relates to our issues was heard on the House floor, and that was House File 2047. That's Representative Nadeau. And this is a bill I've talked about before. This is language that would allow an aide to be in a classroom with children without a teacher for up to 25% of the day. This is a law that currently exists but is due to sunset. So this basically removes that sunset and allows this to continue as language. That was heard but placed on the table, laid on the table, along with several other bills, which just means that at some point it can be taken back up, but at least it was heard and introduced by the author. That's about it for committee and floor action. Looking ahead, a couple of things. I mentioned last week that the big news last week, or the week before really, was the the state budget. And so now, because that is looking less rosy for the future, there may very well be a supplemental budget from the governor to adjust some of the asks to relate to that change. And then finally, the next big deadline in front of us is April 4th, Friday, April 4th, and that is the deadline for all bills to be heard in both the House and the Senate if they're going to move forward. So if you take a look at our bill tracker, which by the way is posted every Tuesday, along with this update, any of the bills that are on there, if they're going to proceed, if they're either going to be considered for the omnibus bill or move forward for a House or Senate floor vote, they will have to be heard in both bodies by Friday, April 4th. And the following week, Friday, April 11th, is when all of the omnibus bills or finance bills need to be put together. So we've got a run up here for the next month of what will probably be increasingly busy activity while committees scramble to meet those deadlines and keep bills alive. And we will, of course, be here every week to update you on that progress. So that's it for now, and look forward to talking with you again next week. Take care.